These are good questions. Yeah, I think that, I think this question of vision is really important, this idea of where we're going. And this idea of transformation of consciousness is also very important. And so I think the Baha'i community is very much a vision-oriented faith. And so this idea of the oneness of humanity, I tried to emphasize its significance as a concept that you adhere to, like what your heart is attached to is the oneness of humanity, and then how that has implications for the way that you choose to be in the world, the way you choose to function in the world. But I think also there's an aspect of this that's not just about consciousness transformation, because knowledge is tested in the field of action. And so then the other piece is this first question about, are there practices in the Baha'i community? And the Baha'i community has been refining for about 25 years a system of education and training that is really trying to build these new types of social actors who are committed to the vision of oneness of the humanity and trying to build that in their communities. It's a very grassroots-oriented community building process. And so I think within that, I would just encourage you to look into there are Baha'i communities everywhere. There's Baha'is here who live in this community, in this area in Buffalo, and wherever you are, who are doing things that are bringing people together to center spirituality, but not just in an ever-expanding way, and they're really open to everybody. And the essence of them is that everybody has a role and a sense of agency in contributing to process of spiritual and social transformation. And so that example that I shared of the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program is a global Baha'i community building program. And is just one example of the educational projects. So one part of the story that I didn't share was that one of the junior youth in my group is helping my wife and I start a children's class for my daughter, who's 3. So we're bringing together other toddlers in our neighborhood to talk about spiritual qualities at the age of 2, to start, at age 2 and 3, it's hard for them to really understand this, but to start to develop the language of our spiritual perception, our moral foundation, and what that looks like for them is part of the process. And then I think in terms of the unique perspective that the Baha'i faith offers on questions of eliminating racism, this idea of the oneness of humanity, peace and love being at its foundation, imply the elimination of all forms of prejudice. And so for many years and decades, the American Baha'i community has been committed to the elimination of racial prejudice. In 1921 in Washington, D.C., the Baha'i community hosted the first interracial, which was not allowed under the law of the land at the time, interracial conference on racial unity. And my office in 2021 celebrated the 100th anniversary of that by hosting another conference. And tomorrow, if you join me at Alumni Hall at 12:30, we'll explore a document that my office has developed that explores the unique contribution that religion and faith can make to the elimination of racism, that brings in some of the Baha'i principles, but also was developed collectively with a few other faith communities. Basically, it's a farmer line. So my grandparents were farmers, and he's basically saying you can't make any money in the winter because your crops are all dead, it's dormant season. So he's basically saying that you have to do all of your work, you have to work really hard during the other seasons to prepare for the harvest, so that you have a successful harvest. That's it. I think the analogy that I shared about the human body is a helpful one in response to that question, in that the human body functions harmoniously, a healthy human body, that's where everything works together, but there's an incredible amount of diversity. So in the Baha'i faith, there's another really important principle, which is called unity in diversity. So this idea is that the diversity of the human race is a source of beauty and richness and should be celebrated, and is actually one of our greatest endowments, is our diversity. But what has happened in the force of racism is that we've created a hierarchy of human value where certain identities are given preference over another. And ever since that was developed, that conception was developed, then this idea of unity has kind of gotten a bad name, right? It's been seen as the solution to that is that we should all be the same. And I think that that's actually a very problematic idea. In fact, we should really find ways in which diversity does not become a source of conflict and contention. And that's part of the work of getting away from these wicked problems that we face in society, because one of the wicked problems is that we've told ourselves that difference is actually a source of conflict, because again we have this conception of human identity and human nature that is rooted in a culture of contest, where this idea I mentioned earlier that power is a zero-sum game, which means that for one group to have power, it means they must take it from another group, and for that group to get justice means that they must take the power away from that other group to gain their power. And so that's a wicked problem. How do we get out of that conception of power and start to imagine a reality where in fact we engage with each other in a way that our diversity is actually celebrated? So I think that this is part of the work that we're doing that I was describing in bringing people together, is learning how to, for example, tell the many diverse stories of our country in a way that honors them and gives light to them and space for them. There's two websites that are really, really useful. They're called, one is Bahá'í.org, BAHAI.org, and that's the global Bahá'í community website. And then there's the American Bahá'í community, which is BAHAI.us. The global one, you can access all of the Bahá'í writings. There's something called the Bahá'í Reference Library, and you can go to the sacred writings of the Bahá'í Faith. They're all online. They're really beautiful. There's a beautiful book, a really simple, small book called The Hidden Words. It was revealed by Baha'u'llah, and it's a collection of spiritual truths that I think everyone would resonate with, but they also capture the essence of religion and the spirit of the Baha'i faith. And then, of course, you can just connect with your local Baha'i community. You can talk with me. I see Brenda and Rick Snyder in the audience. Rick's here. He's a member of the local Baha'i community. So you can also find Baha'is here. That's a great question. I think that when you have conversations on race, a lot of the work, because it's such a sensitive and emotional issue, matter for people, but so critical. So it's like, how do you figure out a way to have that conversation? So a lot of the work that we do is creating the conditions, preparing the ground so that that conversation can be had constructively. So we'll often create discussion parameters. We often do a lot of relationship building, connection building, so that people feel that they can trust each other in the groups that we bring together. And then the question of diversity in the space, I think in some ways we often find that people of color are attracted to questions, to discourses and conversations about race, which is part of the work, is trying to learn how this country can stretch itself to feel that everyone can be part of this conversation and that it's relevant to everyone. I think that's part of what's happening right now. But one of our goals as an office, as a Baha'i community, is to really ensure that this conversation is open to everyone and it's an active area of learning for us. And so recently we, for example, partnered with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, who had their annual conference in Greensboro, North Carolina, just last week. And we brought this material on the narratives of America to that space, and we worked with some of the organizers there to figure out how to adapt the material to connect with the local community populations that come to their conference from all different walks of life. And I think that also one of the things that we're doing with this Narratives of America project is trying to ensure that we don't sound like we're part of any ideological perspective. I think that's an unfortunate, divisive aspect of our discourse right now, is that we very quickly label each other and put each other into certain camps. And so when people come to our spaces and come and read our material, we don't want them to think, oh, they're liberal, oh, they're conservative. We want them to sort of be able to see their values and their self reflected in our spaces and our material as much as possible. So we're learning about it. I don't think we've got the answer, but I think that that's something that everyone should really be trying to think about is how we can have conversations across these divides, and a lot of it is about creating the conditions, creating the right environment, which takes time and takes effort and takes iterations. You have to try it, make mistakes, try it again, and that's how we learn. That's a great question. I don't engage schools too much, even though it's ironic. My dad was a principal for 40 years. What role can schools play? That's a great question. I mean, I think that maybe it's just I think schools do this, but in my work with the Baha'i community, I've started to work with schools. So take the Junior Youth Empowerment Program to the local schools in Washington, D.C., where I live. And it's really, really wonderful when you usually start with like a guidance counselor, community affairs person. But when the school is able to welcome constructive community programs into the school to help them enrich the students' experience, to help them be part of the community. When you think about a school, and you think about like engaging the students, you can think about just offering a program to the students. But then you can also think about social transformation. And when you start shifting your consciousness to think about social transformation, then you might start thinking about, well, who are their parents and their families, and what are their parents and families dealing with, and how can we sort of support the progress and development of the families. And so then you can see how the school, the community organizations, and the families are learning how to work together to understand their hopes and aspirations and their challenges and how they can help solve them. So I think, one thing that might be helpful for the school, and unfortunately, the wicked problem of violence right now in America is making it more and more difficult, right? Schools now have to close their doors to having organizations come in because I'm taking my daughter to pre-K3 for the first time, and every school we went to, one of the main things that the person touring us made sure that they told the parents about was their security, because that's the reality of schooling in America, is that you have to tell the parents that they're doing their best to ensure that a shooter won't come into the school. So I mean, it's sort of an ironic idea to bring, or unfortunately challenging idea, but yeah, maybe bringing communities into school. I know we're out of time, so one more question.
Great.
I really feel like it's just this idea of, I don't want to bore you guys, but it's really this idea that it's a society where every single human being is concerned with the welfare of the entire human family. And it sounds so simple, but can you imagine if every single heart was burning with loving kindness for every other person who crossed their path? I mean, to me, that is, but I think that, of course, like the question of what does it look like, that's the work. That's the idea, is what's on the other side of that mug that we can't see. It's almost, we can't imagine what our world would look like without these awful things happening all the time. But I think the one idea in the Baha'i community that I feel is so beautiful, so helpful for me, is the idea of learning. And that you have a vision of where you want to go, but you have to work together and make mistakes to be able to get there. And that's the part of the process, that there's these disintegrative forces in society that are sweeping away and making room. There's a lot of pain that happens in disintegration, but they make room for integrative forces. And then how can we find those spaces where these integrative forces are starting to come together, and that heartbeat of a new world order, like a nucleus of a new way, is starting to just, you can catch the glimpse of it. And in those spaces, you have to be able to catch the glimpse, and you have to be able to then nurture it, to water it, to commit to it. And it's like that seed of a tree. You won't see the fruit. We won't see the fruit, but we are watering that seed that's going to sprout and grow. So I think this idea of committing to the process of building and committing to the process of learning how to build that society with that vision in mind, however dim it is, feels to me the movement towards the anti-racist society.